huge number of casualties.
I want to go up in the back, way up in the back on the left.
In fact, we scuppered a gentleman here because I interrupted. I'm so sorry. This gentleman here with the beard.
Well, we'll come right back. We'll come back to him next. But go up there. Yeah.
Yes, the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress houses a somewhat incredible collection of, at this point, 40,000 oral histories, and more than half of those are World War II veterans. And I have yet to hear a testimony or read a letter or a manuscript that has any compunction about the dropping of the atomic bomb. To a man, every veteran sees this as bringing a war to an end. And I think it is quite interesting to seem to have discounted that from all of our discussions. It's one thing to look at the documents and to look at the leaders. It's quite another thing to look at the opinions of the men who are expected to put their lives on the line and to actually execute that war.
Okay, but it's not unlike the huge population explosion of Jews in France during the Second World War. I mean by that to say, I'm sure you've had the same experience. Ever been to a French farmhouse that didn't shelter at least 6 Jews? I have not. There must have been a gigantic growth of Jewish population under Vichy, it seems to me. Likewise, I hate to say this, I have never met an American serviceman who was anywhere near the Pacific Theater who has not told me that on the 7th of August 1945 his regiment was scheduled to go into the home islands of Japan. They all seem to believe it. Now, I wasn't there, and I'm not one to want to quarrel with the guys in uniform, but it can't be true. And the argument was not made to them at the time, hey, we've shortened the war, you can go home. This is why we've done it. It was not made till 1947. Whereat, I believe, it was very useful, as was the opening of Buchenwald and Dachau and Neuengamme, instilling any conscience that people might have had about what they'd done. Ah, well, then now I see why it was necessary.
Well, so
I think one has to distrust this stuff very much, in other words.
Can I tell you that just before I came across the pond, I, on the same day, received a telephone call, message on my answer phone, and a letter. And the telephone call was from an elderly gentleman who said, I'm phoning to say, I've just finished your book. I was an air crewman, I was a sergeant navigator in Royal Air Force Bomber Command, and ever since the war, I've suffered in silence the sense of terrible guilt of what we did. I felt it then, I felt it ever since. I've never really been able to articulate it, and here it is being articulated, and I'm just phoning to thank you. And I mean, to get a message like that when you've written a book is very moving. And I've brushed a tear from my eye, and I opened the letter that was lying on my desk, and it said, you bastard, how do you say this about our brave men who did this, and blah, 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 and went on and on and on like that. That wasn't the only letter I got, but there are always two sides to the story. And sometimes then I think to myself, why is it that, that the person who wrote the letter, who was angry with me for having written the book, and who's all, therefore, ever since the war, the woman in question was an 82-year-old ex-Women's Auxiliary Air Force officer, in fact, who had seen the planes going off and some of them not coming back, and that's one reason why she was so angry, because she witnessed the sacrifice from the British side of the story. Why she never had to say anything, was never called upon to justify what she was part of or what had happened, because there was a consensus about it. Whereas he felt we'd won a victory, we'd defeated a terrible enemy who had to be defeated. I was part of that. But at the same time, when you read those accounts of airmen who could feel the heat from Hamburg and from Berlin and Dresden in their aircraft from 20,000 feet and see the glow from hundreds of miles away as they flew back again afterwards, who never said anything because they felt that to do it would be some kind of betrayal even of themselves. And that's one reason for silence.
Anyway, we have Group Captain Leonard Cheshire and many, many other veterans who took a different view even at the time, as well as since. So it's not, in fact, a perfect correlation between being a combatant and being an enthusiastic supporter of area bombing.
We're coming up on 9 o'clock, and I want to give time for people to either buy books outside and talk. So let me take 2 more questions and ask that they be brief and ask that the responses be brief. But you will have a chance to talk to each of them afterwards. So if we don't get to your questions,
if you have a receipt,
yeah,
this is America.
Well done. Here and here. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Right. Sorry.
Thanks a lot. You made compelling contextual arguments against the bombing tactic, and I wanted to play devil's advocate real quick. If Germany and Japan had come across a similar capacity to do civilian bombings to the U.S. and the U.K., wouldn't it be a handicap to not be able to use the same tactic against Germany and Japan prior to them actually doing it to the U.S. and the U.K.? So if your opponent can sucker punch you, wouldn't it be wrong to not be able to sucker punch them before they did to you?
Well, I think there's something that lies behind the question that I have to take issue with, which is that if the point in question were trying to preempt their capacity to do that to you, to do an air bombing campaign against you, that the right thing to do would be to attack that capacity, to attack their aircraft and airfields and bomb-making factories and so on. That to attack their civilians in their cities would have been entirely the wrong strategy, because it would have left unaffected their ability to do it to you. So that's my response.
E.M. Forster wrote a great essay. It's reprinted in Two Cheers for Democracy. It was actually delivered as a BBC broadcast in the early days of the struggle, saying, and he was very anti-militarist, but he said, before we consider what Germany might do to us, we should consider what it's already done to Germany. The wreckage of German culture, the smashing of the universities, the emigration of the genius of Germany, not by any means all of it Jewish, but a lot of it, which very probably meant that they hugely retarded their ability to use physics for warfare. But we knew that they were working on it, and it's the only reason that men like Einstein, who would never have dreamt of prostituting his talent in this way, and Niels Bohr were willing to work on it too, was because of the dread that they might get it first. Well, now, if you're in a situation where you don't know, you know Heisenberg is still in Germany, you know he's a great physicist, you don't know how much resources he has, well, you have to consider yourself entitled to try anything, it seems to me. It would be irresponsible, it would be impeachable not to do so. We don't know how close they came, not very. They were defeated partly because they were fascists. Fascism is irrational and self-destructive. We can be grateful for that, like bin Ladenism.
Sir?
The problem I'm having with the moral position on this is that when you take the moral position, it's very difficult to attack it with logic. When one deals with, it's regrettable because we were enraged. It's regrettable because we wanted to send a message of revenge. It's regrettable because we wanted to make Stalin think twice. It's a very utilitarian argument. But it seems to me to posit the moral position, which is, either with it or you're not, is that the deliberate targeting of civilians, whether from the air or from the ground or for torture or holding them incommunicado for years or whatever, suspension of habeas corpus, and all of these things can be done for utilitarian reasons. But it seems to me that when you take those positions and you use them, you are sailing from the shores of civilization. And there's no return. That it's very hard then to draw those lines.
So you can't think of any circumstances in which pacifism would be an immoral position?
Well, in fact, I can. But when I do that, I realize that I am creating a hole in a wall. I'm breaching the logic. I'm taking a position that may, in fact, be immoral for some other reason that I believe that, overrides the situation.
Fair enough.
Anthony, do you want to?
Oh, I just make a tangential point, which is that the point of raising the moral issue at all, even if it's post facto and even if it's a long time afterwards, seems to me to actually pack much more of a punch than people realize. I mean, I wonder whether it isn't the case that some military commander somewhere, or much more to the point, some politician making a decision about going to war or doing something during the course of a war, doesn't reflect what will happen in 30 or 40 years' time when some meddling philosopher comes along and says, what you did was bad, and ruins his reputation. And that might be, it probably isn't, but it might be a constraint on some people sometime. And, the hope, the struggle is, here we all are, we're in the raging seas of controversy and history, and we're trying to hold the lighted candle up as high as possible, and that's the point. Having the debate at all is one way of trying to save something back from our great endeavour to be civilised, and even in times of emergency.
And having it at the time, in London, in the press, in Parliament, in the churches. Yeah. And that's not terrible. Yeah. It would have been nice if the Germans were able to read that discussion. It would be very nice if they ought to have it themselves. Alas, it wasn't the nature of the enemy that we were confronting.
You have been a terrific audience. Thank you for your patience. I trust that's because...
Patience?
Well, if you let me continue. I trust that's because you found it interesting and thought-provoking and engaging, which I certainly did as well. Thank you all for coming. Both Anthony and Christopher will be outside afterwards if you'd like to speak to them further, and appreciate your being here.
Thank you. No, I'm sorry.
AC Grayling is a philosophy professor at Birkbeck College, University of London, and a fellow at the World Economic Forum. His book is Among the Dead Cities,